Picture this, if you will. You are in Africa. The year is 2.6 million years ago. Your ancestors, Australopithecus afarensis, leave the safety of the forest for the nearby savanna in search of food. This was a big evolutionary leap. Life on the open savanna was risky, what with all those predators, but hunting on the savanna was also much easier than in the forest. So your ancestors ventured forth anyway, carrying with them only the clothes on their backs and the brains that would eventually evolve into yours. After several days of hunting small animals and gathering fruit, your family, group or band decides it's time to return to the safety of the forest. But nature has other plans. The sky flashes with lightning and booms with thunder. A fierce storm rolls across the plains, forcing your band to press on, braving the elements. By the time they reach the forest's edge, they are soaked to the bone and exhausted. But they're almost there, and then, out of the corner of an eye, someone spots a lion slinking through the tall grasses, its gaze fixed on the struggling hominids. There is nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The lion is upon them before anyone can react. Your ancestor with the largest teeth and meanest glare shoves the weakest and youngest to the ground and roars, challenging the lion. And so begins a brutal fight, one that will determine the fate of your very species and, of course, whether or not you get to be born. This story of survival may sound familiar because it's one that we humans have repeated many times over since we first set out to conquer the planet. We are social creatures who rely on cooperation and community to survive, but often find ourselves separated from our social groups by circumstance or disaster. Our instincts tell us to seek out and create community, even when the forces of nature threaten to tear us apart. But let's take this story of survival a step further. Imagine that you are standing outside that forest, watching these two bands of Australopithecus struggle for supremacy. What you are witnessing, if you were somehow able to comprehend it, is a critical moment in human evolution. The ability to live in groups, to cooperate and work together, is one of the key factors that allowed our ancestors to outcompete all other primates and become the dominant species on Earth. It allowed us to hunt bigger animals, care for our young for longer, explore new environments, and basically kick all kinds of ass. To understand where we came from, we need to imagine what life was like for our earliest ancestors. We tend to think of humans as highly evolved creatures, but our distant ancestors were just as alive and real as we are, and in some ways, they were better suited to their environment than we are. After all, they survived in an environment filled with giant predators, while wearing nothing but a fig leaf. In order to understand how our ancestors managed to survive, we have to look at the challenges they faced. Most people picture early humans as hairy, hunched-over knuckle-walking creatures that spent most of their time searching for berries and fleeing from saber-toothed tigers. But that picture isn't completely accurate. Early hominids such as Australopithecus afarensis weren't built for knuckle-walking. They were built to run. Their shoulders and spines were designed for long-distance running, and their narrow waists and big glute muscles helped propel them forward with every stride. So although they did spend a lot of time on the ground, they were probably more likely to be sprinting away from danger than shuffling along on all fours. Instead, they probably climbed trees to escape predators and find safe places to sleep. But climbing trees and running on the savanna aren't exactly activities that lend themselves to privacy. For our ancestors, there was really no such thing as being alone. They lived in groups, hunted in groups, and slept in groups. And although we don't know exactly how large these bands were, researchers estimate that they had between 15 and 30 members. These bands were made up of adult pairs and their offspring, plus any other unpaired individuals who chose to join the group. Groups this size are pretty typical of most primates today, but they are extremely rare in the animal kingdom. Being part of such a large group wasn't necessarily easy, but it did have some major benefits. Working together, our ancestors could take down much larger prey than they could individually, and living in groups meant that there were always adults around to help care for infants and children, allowing mothers to go off and forage or hunt. Cooperation within these groups also meant that individuals could specialize. Some could focus on gathering while others focused on hunting, allowing everyone to benefit from each other's skills. And that brings us back to that fateful day when a band of Australopithecus sought shelter in the forest from a raging storm. When a second band showed up, claiming the best sleeping spots, conflict was inevitable. But instead of fighting, they could have just split up and found somewhere else to sleep. Why do you think that is? Well, splitting up would have been dangerous. Our ancestors would have been much more vulnerable to predators if they were alone or in small groups. Fighting was also risky. Injuries could make it hard to find food or flee from predators. So although fighting might have seemed like the quickest way to solve their problem, it was also extremely risky. The key to understanding why our ancestors fought is realizing that the decision to fight or not wasn't up to just one individual. It was up to everyone in both groups. Each member of the group had to agree to fight, or else someone could have run off into the forest to safety. This kind of cooperation is called decentralized cooperation. Unlike a hive of bees or an ant colony, which is controlled by a queen, human beings have no queen. Decisions are made by groups of individuals who all have something to say. This level of cooperation allowed our ancestors to come up with complex strategies for hunting and to defend themselves from predators. It allowed them to plan ahead, share resources, and generally outsmart just about any other creature they encountered. It also allowed them to expand their territory and settle in new environments, an ability that led to the development of language, tools, and ultimately civilization. The downside of decentralized cooperation is that it's, well, decentralized. Even if everyone agrees to work together, that doesn't guarantee success. Sometimes things just don't work out. Take for instance those ancestral Australopithecus trying to claim a fig tree for their own. If the competing band refuses to move, there's really not much they can do except try to take the fig tree by force, and once the battle starts, there's no turning back. Just like the hominid bands in our story, our ancestors were constantly competing for limited resources, defending their territory and trying to ensure the safety of their group. But the benefits of decentralized cooperation outweighed the risks. Our ancestors learned that working together allowed them to accomplish more than they ever could alone. And although our lives may seem vastly different from those of our ancestors, we are still cooperating to accomplish amazing things.